The dust settled on the Montrose auction block like a death shroud as Grace Whittaker stood with her head held high despite the chains binding her wrists. Colorado Territory, 1875, was supposed to be a land of opportunity, not the place where her freedom would be sold to the highest bidder. Her father's gambling debts had sealed her fate, and now at 22, she was about to become someone's property for 3 years of indentured servitude, a practice that persisted in remote territories, despite being technically illegal since the Civil War. $500 for the girl. The auctioneer's voice boomed across the crowded square. Strong back, educated too, can read and write. Good for housekeeping, farming, whatever you need. Grace felt bile rising in her throat as men sized her up like cattle. Her once fine blue dress was travel-worn, her auburn hair dulled by dust, but her emerald eyes blazed with defiance. She'd arrived in Montrose just 3 days earlier, hoping to find her father and discover he'd made a fortune in the silver mines. Instead, she found only his debts and the creditors waiting to collect. From the back of the crowd, a tall figure moved forward. His face was shadowed by a wide-brimmed hat, but his confident stride parted the onlookers like Moses at the Red Sea. Spurs clinked with each deliberate step, the sun glinting off his silver star, a marshal's badge. "I'll pay 600, came a voice from her left, a red-faced cattle baron with yellowed teeth and hands that could crush a man's windpipe. 700, called another, a saloon owner whose reputation with female employees made Grace's skin crawl. The auctioneer grinned, sensing profit. $700. Do I hear $1,000? The deep voice cut through the bidding like a knife through butter. A hush fell over the crowd as the tall stranger stepped into full view. The sun illuminated features that were all hard angles and determination, a strong jaw shadowed with stubble, piercing blue eyes that didn't waver from Grace's face. "Marshal Jackson Lawson," someone whispered, and the name rippled through the crowd. The auctioneer swallowed hard. $1,000 from Marshal Lawson, going once, going twice. No one dared challenge him. Sold to Marshal Lawson for $1,000. The marshal approached the platform, pulling a leather pouch from his vest. He counted out the money deliberately, each coin landing with a decisive clink in the auctioneer's palm. When the final coin was paid, he looked up at Grace, then at the seller, a portly banker representing her father's creditors. "She is with me now," he said, his voice carrying an authority that brooked no argument. He took the key to her shackles and unlocked them himself, his fingers surprisingly gentle against her chafed wrists. Grace stared at him, uncertain whether to feel relief or dread. A lawman buying a woman didn't necessarily mean safety. "Why?" she whispered. "Not here," he murmured, offering his arm. "Walk with me." With little choice, she placed her hand on his forearm, feeling the solid muscle beneath his shirt sleeve as he led her away from the auction block. The crowd parted again, some with disappointed expressions, others with knowing smirks that made Grace's cheeks burn. They walked in silence through Montrose's dusty Main Street, past the general store, the blacksmiths, and the Silver Dollar Saloon. The marshal nodded to townsfolk who greeted him, but maintained a purposeful stride, guiding her toward a modest 2-story building with a sign reading Marshal's Office. Once inside, he released her arm and moved behind his desk, gesturing to a chair opposite. "Please sit, Miss Whittaker." She remained standing. "How do you know my name? Your father mentioned you quite often." Grace's heart stuttered. "You knew my father." Marshal Lawson removed his hat, revealing thick dark hair with a slight wave. He looked younger without the hat shadowing his features, perhaps 30, with lines at the corners of his eyes that spoke of squinting into the sun and trouble. "James Whittaker rode with me for a time. He was my deputy before the gambling took hold of him." His expression softened slightly. "He spoke of you with pride, said you were back east getting educated." Grace sank into the chair, her knees suddenly weak. "He's truly gone, then?" "Yes, madam. Found him 3 weeks ago in Devil's Canyon. Looked like he'd been ambushed. I'm sorry." Grace had prepared herself for this news since receiving the cryptic letter from her father's creditors, but hearing it confirmed still hollowed her out. She pressed her fingertips to her temples, fighting tears. "And his debts? Substantial. Which is why those vultures were auctioning you off." His jaw tightened. "That contract they forced you to sign wouldn't hold up in a proper court, but out here," he gestured vaguely. "So you bought me instead." Her voice hardened. "What labor do you expect, Marshal?" His eyes widened, then narrowed as understanding dawned. "None, Miss Whittaker." "I didn't buy you, I bought your freedom." He slid the contract across the desk. "This paper is worthless now." She stared at him. "I don't understand. Your father saved my life once. I owed him a debt, and now I've paid it by saving you from those men. So I'm free, just like that." He nodded. "Just like that. I'll arrange passage back east if that's what you want." Grace looked down at the contract, then back at the marshal. Hope and suspicion warred within her. "And if I have nowhere to go?" Jackson Lawson considered her for a long moment. "Montrose has need of a schoolteacher. The last one left to get married 6 months ago. Children are running wild, much to their parents' dismay. I have some experience teaching. I tutored younger students at my boarding school." "Then perhaps this is where you're meant to be, Miss Whittaker. At least until you decide otherwise." He stood and moved to a cabinet, retrieving a small key. "There's a boarding house 3 doors down. Mrs. Henderson is strict but fair. Tell her I sent you and give her this." He handed her a folded note with the key. "The key is to your father's deposit box at the bank. Not much there, I'm afraid, but it's yours now." Grace took both items, her fingers trembling slightly. "I don't know how to thank you, Marshal Lawson." "No thanks needed, just doing right by an old friend." He placed his hat back on his head. "Montrose isn't Boston or New York, but it's growing. Decent folks here mostly. You could make a life." Grace stood, straightening her shoulders with a dignity that had survived the auction block. "Perhaps I will." She extended her hand, which he took after a moment's hesitation. His palm was calloused against her softer skin, warm and solid. "Thank you for my freedom, Marshal Jackson," he said quietly. "If you're staying in Montrose, you might as well call me Jackson." "Jackson," she repeated, the name feeling strangely intimate on her lips. "And I'm Grace." He held her hand a moment longer than necessary before releasing it. "Welcome to Montrose, Grace." As she stepped out into the bright Colorado sunshine, Grace felt something she hadn't experienced since receiving news of her father's death possibility. The road ahead was uncertain, but for the first time in weeks, she was walking it as a free woman. The boarding house was exactly where Jackson had said, a tidy whitewashed building with green shutters and a small porch adorned with potted geraniums. Mrs. Henderson proved to be a formidable woman in her 50s with steely gray hair and eyes that missed nothing, but her expression softened when Grace presented Jackson's note. "Marshal Lawson vouches for you, does he?" She adjusted her spectacles. "Well, that's good enough for me. I've got a room at the back, small but with a nice view of the mountains. $3 a week includes breakfast and supper." Grace hesitated. I don't have much money at present." Mrs. Henderson waved dismissively. "Marshall's note says to put it on his account until you're settled." "Don't worry, dear, we'll sort it out." She peered more closely at Grace. "You look like you've been through the ringer. Come along now, let's get you settled." The room was indeed small but clean, with a narrow bed, a chest of drawers, and a small desk beneath a window that framed the majestic Rocky Mountains. After weeks of travel and uncertainty, It felt like a palace. "Supper's at 6 sharp," Mrs. Henderson said from the doorway. "Bathrooms down the hall. There's a tin tub if you'd like a proper bath, just ask and I'll have hot water brought up." Her expression softened further. "I heard what happened at the auction block today. Shameful business. Thank the Lord for the marshal." Grace nodded, unable to find words. "Rest now," the older woman said gently. "Tomorrow's soon enough to face the world." Alone at last, Grace sank onto the edge of the bed. For the first time in days, she allowed herself to cry for her father, for her lost life in Boston, for the terror of the auction block, and finally, in gratitude for an unexpected savior. The next morning brought renewed determination. After a hearty breakfast of eggs, bacon, and biscuits with the other boarders' two elderly sisters, a young telegraph operator, and a traveling salesman, Grace set out to explore Montrose properly. The town was larger than she'd initially thought, stretching several blocks in each direction from the main street. The silver boom had brought prosperity, evident in the solid brick buildings that housed the bank, hotel, and several mercantile establishments. There were rough elements, 2 saloons doing brisk business, even in the morning hours, and an alley where painted ladies stood smoking, but overall, it had the feeling of a place striving for respectability. Grace's first stop was the bank, where she presented her key to a teller who led her to a small private room. Her father's deposit box contained little: a pocket watch, a faded daguerreotype type of her mother who had died when Grace was a child, a silver locket containing a lock of what must be her own baby hair, and a small leather pouch with $23, all that remained of James Whittaker's fortune. "Your father was a good man," the bank manager said when she emerged. "Demons got the better of him, but he loved you fiercely." Grace nodded, clutching the watch and locket. "Thank you." Her next stop was the mayor's office, a cramped room above the general store where Mayor Willard Porter, a corpulent man with an impressive mustache, received her with surprise and delight when she inquired about the teaching position. "A providence," he declared. 26 children in this town with no proper education for half a year. Parents are at their wits' end. When can you start, Miss Whittaker?" "I would need to see the schoolhouse first," she said cautiously, "and discuss terms." Of course. $30 a month, room and board extra. School term runs September through May, but we're desperate enough to start immediately if you're willing. It wasn't a princely sum, but it would allow her independence. "I'd like to start as soon as possible." The schoolhouse stood at the edge of town, a simple one-room building with rows of desks, a pot-bellied stove, and windows that needed washing. Books were few and in poor condition, the blackboard cracked, but Grace saw potential. "It needs work," Mayor Porter admitted. "But the children need you more." "I'll take the position," Grace decided, "and I'll start Monday." Word spread quickly through Montrose. By supper time, Grace had been approached by 3 mothers, eager to meet the new schoolteacher and assure her of their children's exceptional intelligence and good behavior. Mrs. Henderson beamed with pride as if she'd personally arranged the appointment. "I knew you had quality the moment I saw you," she declared over pot roast and potatoes. "Just what this town needs: refinement and education." The telegraph operator, a young man named Thomas, raised his glass. "To Miss Whittaker, our new schoolmarm." It was a heady feeling to go from auctioned property to respected professional in a single day. After dinner, Grace sat on the boarding house porch, watching twilight settle over the mountains when the distinctive sound of spurs announced a visitor. Jackson Lawson climbed the steps, hat in hand. "Good evening, Miss Whittaker, Mrs. Henderson." He nodded to both women. "I trust you're settling in. Mrs. Henderson excused herself with a knowing smile that made Grace blush. "I've secured the teaching position," Grace said as Jackson took the vacant chair beside her. "Thanks to you. I just pointed the way, you did the rest." In the fading light, his features seemed softer. "Mayor Porter is beside himself with joy, claims you're a gift from Providence." Grace laughed softly. "Hardly that, but I'm grateful for the opportunity. Your father would be proud." A comfortable silence fell between them, broken only by distant piano music from the saloon and the chirping of crickets. "Tell me about him," Grace said finally. "The father you knew." "He wrote seldom, and when he did, his letters were sparse." Jackson leaned back, his expression thoughtful. "He was a man of contradictions. Fearless in the face of danger, we faced down a gang of cattle rustlers together, him armed with nothing but a derringer and sheer nerve, but helpless against the lure of cards and whiskey." He shook his head. "He spoke of you often, how smart you were, how determined. Said you got that from your mother." "I barely remember her," Grace admitted. "She died of fever when I was 6. He carried her picture, showed it to me once. You favor her." The observation warmed her. "He sent me to my mother's sister in Boston when I was 10. Said the West was no place for a girl without a mother." She sighed. "I think he just couldn't manage both his demons and a child. He tried to clean up his act many times. Last year he struck silver, a modest claim but promising. Thought finally he'd make his fortune, send for you." Jackson's voice lowered. "Then the claim played out and he fell back into old habits and ended up in Devil's Canyon." Jackson nodded grimly. "I'm still investigating his death. It wasn't random." "What do you mean?" He hesitated. "Your father had enemies, men he owed money to, yes, but also he knew things, witnessed things. I believe that's what got him killed." A chill ran through Grace despite the warm evening. "What things?" "That's what I'm trying to figure out." Jackson's jaw tightened. "I promise you I'll find who's responsible." "Is that why you were at the auction?" "Looking for clues?" "Partly," he admitted. "But mostly because I couldn't let James Whittaker's daughter be sold like property, not while I wear this badge." He touched the silver star on his chest. "Well," Grace said after a moment, "it seems I have two purposes in Montrose now. Teaching and helping you solve my father's murder." "No." His response was immediate and firm. "That's not why I told you. This could be dangerous. He was my father. And I promised him I'd look after you if anything happened to him. That doesn't include putting you in harm's way." Their gazes locked in silent challenge until Grace relented. "At least keep me informed," Jackson sighed. "I'll tell you what I can." He stood, placing his hat back on his head. "It's getting late. I should let you rest. You've had quite a day." "Thank you for checking on me," Grace said, also rising. "I'll walk by the schoolhouse tomorrow, see if there's anything you need." As he descended the porch steps, Grace called after him. "Jackson." He turned. "I'm glad my father had a friend like you." In the lamplight from the porch, she could have sworn she saw a flush creep up his neck. "Good night, Grace." She watched his tall figure disappear into the gathering darkness, aware of a flutter in her chest that had nothing to do with grief or fear. The weekend passed in a flurry of preparation. Grace cleaned the schoolhouse from top to bottom with help from several mothers and their daughters, ordered supplies from the general store, and created a basic curriculum for students ranging from 6 to 16 years of age. Jackson appeared briefly on Saturday, hammer and nails in hand, to fix broken desks and the cracked blackboard. "You're handy with tools for a lawman," Grace observed as he expertly repaired a wobbly chair. "Was a carpenter before I pinned on this star," he replied, driving a nail with one clean strike. "Still am when needed." His presence drew curious glances from the mothers helping Grace, and she didn't miss their knowing smiles. Montrose was clearly forming opinions about the new schoolteacher and the marshal. Opinions Grace wasn't ready to acknowledge even to herself. Monday morning arrived with a knot of anticipation in Grace's stomach. She dressed carefully in her best blue dress, her mother's locket at her throat, and arrived at the schoolhouse an hour early to find a surprise waiting, a beautiful brass bell mounted by the door. "Figure every proper school needs a bell," Jackson said, appearing from around the corner with a steaming cup of coffee for her. "Salvaged it from an old church in Denver." "It's perfect," Grace said, genuinely touched. "Thank you. Good luck today." He tipped his hat and left as the first students began to appear, escorted by parents eager to make good impressions. By 9 o'clock, Grace faced 24 children of varying ages, sizes, and apparent willingness to learn. She rang the new bell, savoring its clear tone, and called her first class to order. "Good morning. I am Miss Whittaker, your new teacher." The day passed in a blur of assessments, introductions, and establishing rules. Some children were woefully behind in their studies. Others showed remarkable aptitude. By afternoon, Grace had separated them into 3 broad groups based on ability rather than age, a system that raised eyebrows among some parents but made practical sense. As the children filed out at day's end, a girl of about 10 lingered, a thin child with solemn brown eyes and a braid of wheat-colored hair. "Miss Whittaker, I'm Sarah Lawson." Grace blinked in surprise. "Lawson, are you related to Marshal Lawson? He's my uncle." "My pa was his brother, but he and ma died of the typhoid 3 years ago. Uncle Jack raised me since. I didn't know the Marshal had family in town, or that he was raising a child, just me. We live behind the Marshal's office. There's a little house there." Sarah twisted her braid nervously. "Uncle Jack says you're from Boston and know all about books and proper things. I was wondering, could you teach me to be a lady? Like you?" The request, so earnest and unexpected, touched Grace deeply. "Oh, Sarah, being a lady isn't about where you're from or how you speak. It's about kindness and strength and dignity. But you walk so nice, and your voice is so pretty," Sarah persisted. "The other girls say I'm too rough because I can ride and shoot like a boy." "There's nothing wrong with those skills," Grace assured her. "But if you'd like, I could teach you other things too. Perhaps you could come early some mornings and we could have special lessons." Sarah's face brightened. "Really? Uncle Jack says I shouldn't bother you because you're too fine for the likes of us, but I knew you'd be nice." "Did he really say that?" Grace felt a strange twinge of hurt. "Well, not exactly," Sarah admitted. "He said you were raised fancy and might find Montrose lacking, but I could tell he likes you because he shaved twice yesterday before going to fix the schoolhouse." Grace felt heat rise to her cheeks. "Well, I'm very glad he fixed those desks. They're much steadier now. He's real good at fixing things." Sarah gathered her books. "Except cooking. He's terrible at cooking." "Is he now?" Grace couldn't help smiling at this glimpse into Jackson's private life. "Worst biscuits in Colorado territory." Sarah headed for the door. "See you tomorrow, Miss Whittaker." Grace sat at her desk long after Sarah left, contemplating this new information. Jackson Lawson, the stern marshal, was raising his orphan niece alone. It explained his immediate reaction to Grace's situation. He understood what it meant to lose family, to be suddenly responsible for picking up the pieces. The following weeks settled into a rhythm. Mornings were devoted to teaching, afternoons to tutoring struggling students, and evenings to grading papers and preparing lessons. Grace found unexpected joy in watching young minds discover new ideas, especially among children who'd had little previous education. Sarah Lawson became her most dedicated student, arriving early 3 mornings a week for lessons in elocution, literature, and what the girl called lady things: posture, polite conversation, and the finer points of table manners. Grace found herself looking forward to these sessions as much as Sarah did. "Uncle Jack says my grammar's improving," Sarah announced one morning. "He says he hardly recognizes me when I talk about literature." "Your uncle notices a lot," Grace observed, helping Sarah with a particularly difficult passage from Little Women. "He notices everything about you," Sarah said casually. "Like how your hair looks like fire when the sun hits it, and how you smile different at everyone." Grace nearly dropped her book. "I'm sure he doesn't." "Oh, he does. He told Mr. Wilson at the general store that you have the most expressive eyes he's ever seen, like looking into spring itself," he said. Sarah grinned. "Mr. Wilson teased him something fierce." Grace cleared her throat. "Let's focus on Louisa May Alcott, shall we?" But the information stayed with her, warming her thoughts during the chilly October days that followed. Jackson remained a steady presence in Montrose, stopping by the schoolhouse occasionally with small improvements: a new map, better chalk, wood for the stove as winter approached. Their conversations were brief but increasingly comfortable, though he never referenced Sarah's early morning lessons. On a crisp Saturday in late October, Grace was returning from the general store with supplies when she heard raised voices from the alley beside the Silver Dollar Saloon. Instinct told her to walk faster, to not get involved, but then she recognized Jackson's deep voice. "You're making a mistake, Hardin. I know what you did, what you're still doing. You don't know nothing, Lawson, and you can't prove nothing. I know you were in Devil's Canyon the night James Whittaker died. I know about the silver shipments you've been hijacking. It ends now." Grace froze. This was about her father. "You threatening me, Marshal?" The other voice was slurred but dangerous. "Because I got friends, important friends. They wouldn't take kindly to accusations. I'm not threatening, I'm promising. I find one more piece of evidence connecting you to Whittaker's death or those robberies, you'll hang." A harsh laugh. "Good luck with that. Meanwhile, maybe I'll pay a visit to that pretty school teacher everyone says you're sweet on. See if she's as proper up close as she looks from a distance. You go near her, it'll be the last thing you ever do." Jackson's voice had dropped to a register Grace had never heard: cold, lethal. "Hit a nerve, did I? The mighty Marshal Lawson gone soft over a woman. Your enemies are gonna love that weakness." A scuffle, then the thud of a body hitting wood. "That's assault on an officer," the stranger wheezed. "That's a warning," Jackson growled. "Stay away from Grace Whittaker." Grace backed away quickly, heart pounding, and hurried to the boarding house. Inside her room, she placed the packages on her bed with trembling hands. Jackson was investigating her father's murder, as promised, and it had something to do with silver shipments. But more disturbingly, his interest in her was apparently town gossip, and now it had made her a target. A knock at her door startled her. Mrs. Henderson stood there, concern etched on her face. "Marshal Lawson is downstairs, asking to speak with you. He seems agitated." Grace smoothed her hair and descended the stairs to find Jackson pacing the small sitting room, hat in hand. When he saw her, visible relief washed over his features. "Grace, you're all right." "Of course I am. Why wouldn't I be?" He ran a hand through his hair, disheveling it further. "I need to speak with you, privately." Mrs. Henderson discreetly withdrew, though Grace had no doubt she'd find a reason to dust nearby. "What's happened?" Grace asked once they were alone. Jackson stepped closer, lowering his voice. "I've received information that puts you at risk. I believe the men who killed your father know you're in Montrose and they may think you have information." "What information?" "I don't know exactly." "Your father was tracking something following money from the silver shipments. He had evidence of corruption reaching into Denver, maybe higher." Jackson's eyes were intense with concern. "These are dangerous men, Grace." "I heard you," she admitted. "In the alley, with someone named Hardin." His expression darkened. "You shouldn't have been anywhere near there." "I was coming from the store. I couldn't help overhearing." "Then you heard his threat." Jackson's hands clenched. "I can't protect you every minute of the day. I want you to stay with Sarah and me for a while." "Stay with you?" Grace's eyes widened. "That would cause a scandal that would cost me my position." "Your position won't matter if you're dead," he snapped, then softened immediately. "I'm sorry, that was blunt, but I'm concerned, truly concerned. Surely I'm safe at the boarding house." "There are other people. Mrs. Henderson and 2 elderly sisters won't stop determined men." He sighed heavily. "Look, I've arranged another option. The Wilsons have a daughter your age who's married to a rancher outside town. They've agreed to host you for a few weeks until I resolve this situation." "You've arranged all this without consulting me." Grace felt her temper flare. "I'm not a child, Jackson, and I've only just established myself here. Disappearing to a ranch would undo all that." "Mayor Porter agrees it's for the best. He's arranged for Mrs. Wilson to substitute teach." "You spoke to the mayor before speaking to me." Her voice rose despite her efforts to remain calm. "I'm trying to keep you safe." His own frustration matched hers. "These men killed your father. They won't hesitate to use you or harm you. And sending me away solves that. Until I can build a case strong enough to arrest them, yes." They glared at each other, mutual concern manifesting as anger. "What about Sarah?" Grace asked finally. "If it's so dangerous, shouldn't she leave town too? Sarah is staying with the Reverend and his wife. No one connects her to this investigation. But they connect me to it. And to you." The implication of Hardin's words in the alley hung between them. Jackson's expression softened. "That's my fault. I haven't been discreet in my admiration." The admission sucked the anger from her. "Oh, I promised your father I'd protect you. I can't do that effectively if you're in town right now." Grace sank onto the settee. "When would I need to leave?" "Tomorrow morning, early." He sat beside her, not touching but close enough that she could feel his warmth. "It won't be forever, Grace, just until it's safe. And if I refuse," his blue eyes held hers steadily, "then I'd have to assign a deputy to follow you everywhere, school, boarding house, church, every moment." "That would be even more scandalous than staying with you and Sarah," she pointed out. "Yes, it would." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "So you see my dilemma." Grace considered her options, limited as they were. The Wilsons' daughter, her ranch is far, half-day's ride. Good people. Their daughter Emily is lovely. You'd have company your own age, and it's just until I sort this out. It was reasonable, even if it chafed at her independence. "Very well, I'll go, but I want regular updates on your investigation." "Agreed." Relief flooded his features. "Pack only what you need." "We'll leave at dawn." As he stood to go, Grace caught his wrist. "Jackson, be careful. These men have already killed once." His expression warmed at her concern. "Always am." The ranch was exactly as Jackson had described, a sturdy 2-story home nestled in a valley, surrounded by aspen trees blazing gold in their autumn glory. Emily Wilson Parker greeted Grace with genuine warmth, showing her to a comfortable room overlooking the valley. "Marshal Lawson was quite insistent we take good care of you," Emily confided, helping Grace unpack. "Said you were special to the whole town." Her smile turned sly. "Though I suspect you're especially special to him." Grace focused on arranging her books. "The Marshal is very protective of all Montrose citizens." "If you say so." Emily laughed. "But I've known Jack Lawson for 5 years, and I've never seen him look at anyone the way he looks at you." The days at the ranch passed pleasantly enough. Emily was delightful company, her husband Robert equally welcoming. They included Grace in ranch activities. She learned to gather eggs without getting pecked, to churn butter, and even to ride properly on a gentle mare named Daisy. In the evenings, they played cards or read aloud by lamplight. But Grace missed her students, especially Sarah. She missed the satisfaction of teaching, of making a difference. And though she was loath to admit it even to herself, she missed Jackson's steady presence. A week into her stay, Jackson rode out to the ranch with supplies from town and news of the investigation. "We've arrested 2 of Hardin's men," he told Grace as they walked along the creek that bordered the property. "They've implicated others, but not Hardin himself yet. He's careful. But you're making progress." "Yes." He helped her over a fallen log, his hand lingering on hers. "Your students miss you, Sarah especially." "I miss them too." She glanced at him. "And how are you? You look tired." "I'm fine." But the shadows under his eyes betrayed him. "You're not sleeping." "Sleep is overrated." He attempted a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "I'll rest when this is finished." "And when will that be?" "Soon, I hope." He changed the subject. "Emily says you're becoming quite the rancher." "Hardly, but I have learned some useful skills." She studied his profile. "Jackson, there's something you're not telling me," he hesitated. "We found your father's journal, hidden in the floorboards of his cabin." Her heart quickened. "What did it say?" "Names. Dates. Details of silver shipments diverted by corrupt officials. It's the evidence we needed, but—" He frowned. "There were pages missing. Important pages. Your father wrote that he'd hidden additional evidence somewhere only Grace would think to look." "What does that mean?" "I was hoping you might know." Grace thought hard. "Father and I. We didn't have many private jokes or special places. He sent me away when I was so young. Think, was there anything he gave you, any place that was special to you both?" She touched her mother's locket instinctively. "Just this, and his watch. But I've examined both carefully. There's nothing hidden." Jackson nodded, though disappointment flickered in his eyes. "Keep thinking. It could be important." He rode back to town that evening, leaving Grace with troubled thoughts. What had her father hidden, and where would he expect her to look? She fell asleep pondering the question, her dreams filled with fragmented memories of a father she'd barely known. The next morning she woke with sudden clarity. "Of course," she murmured. "The cash." When she was 8, before being sent east, her father had taught her about prospecting. They'd made a game of hiding treasure, pretty rocks and small trinkets in a hollow tree near their cabin. He'd called it their secret cache. "Emily," she called, rushing downstairs. "I need to go back to Montrose, today." Emily looked alarmed. "The marshal was very clear. It's important." "It's about my father's murder." "Then I should send for the marshal." "There isn't time." Grace seized Emily's hands. "Please, Robert can escort me. I'll be careful." After much persuasion, Robert agreed to take her, armed with both a rifle and a revolver. They rode hard, reaching Montrose by mid-afternoon. The town seemed eerily quiet as they approached, the main street nearly deserted. "Something's not right," Robert muttered, hand moving to his gun. They dismounted at the marshal's office, but it was empty. A deputy Grace didn't recognize approached from across the street. "Miss Whittaker, you shouldn't be here. Marshal's orders." "Where is Marshal Lawson?" Grace demanded. "Out at Devil's Canyon. Got word Hardin was meeting someone there." The deputy shifted uncomfortably. "He took most of the men. Left me to watch the town. Devil's Canyon, where her father had died. And Jackson had gone there with limited backup." "We have to go there," Grace told Robert. "Now." "That's 15 miles of rough country and it'll be dark soon," Robert protested. "Then we'd better hurry." The deputy tried to dissuade them, but Grace was adamant. As they remounted, Sarah came running from the direction of the church. "Miss Whittaker, you're back." Her joy quickly turned to concern. "Are you going after Uncle Jack? I heard the men talking. It's a trap." Mr. Hardin was laughing about it at the saloon after Uncle Jack left. Grace's blood ran cold. "A trap?" He said Uncle Jack would find more than he bargained for in the canyon. that he'd end up like Miss Whittaker's pa. Sarah's eyes filled with tears. I tried to find Deputy Miller to tell him, but I couldn't. You did right to tell me. Grace made a swift decision. Sarah, go to Mrs. Henderson. Tell her what you told me. Robert, we need to hurry. You're not going, Robert said firmly. I'll take a couple of men, and there's no time to argue. Grace was already turning her horse. I know where my father hid the evidence. It's in that canyon, and Jackson is riding into danger because of it. Robert looked torn, then sighed heavily. Emily will skin me alive if anything happens to you. They rode hard, pushing their horses as the sun sank toward the mountain peaks. Devil's Canyon loomed before them, a jagged gash in the landscape where shadows gathered early. We should approach from the north, Robert said as they dismounted to rest the horses briefly. More cover that way. The sound of gunfire echoed through the canyon, sharp cracks that bounced off the rock walls. No time for stealth, Grace said, gathering her reins. That's Jackson. They remounted and rode toward the sound, recklessly fast on the treacherous terrain. Rounding a bend, they came upon chaos, 3 men pinned behind boulders, exchanging fire with figures on the canyon rim. One of the men below was Jackson, blood staining his left sleeve. There. Grace pointed to a lightning-struck pine near the canyon wall. That's where the cache would be. Robert fired his rifle toward the men on the rim, creating a momentary diversion. Below, Jackson's head snapped up at the new gunfire, his expression turning to horror as he spotted Grace. Get down. He shouted as bullets splintered rock nearby. Grace slid from her horse, crouching behind a boulder. The tree, Jackson. My father's cache is in the hollow tree. Understanding dawned in his eyes. He signaled to his men, who provided covering fire as he sprinted to the dead pine. Reaching inside the hollow trunk, he withdrew a small metal box, then dashed back to cover as bullets kicked up dust at his heels. More gunfire erupted, reinforcements arriving from town, led by Deputy Miller. The shooters on the rim found themselves caught in crossfire and began to retreat. Stay down, Robert told Grace, moving to join the deputies. But Grace was watching Jackson, who had opened the metal box and was examining its contents with grim satisfaction. When their eyes met across the distance, something passed between them: relief, understanding, and something deeper that made her heart race despite the danger. The gunfight ended abruptly with the surrender of the men on the rim. Among them was Hardin, cursing viciously as he was led away in handcuffs. Grace ran to Jackson, who was being tended by one of his deputies. You're hurt. Bullet just grazed me. His eyes never left her face. You shouldn't be here. It's too dangerous. If I weren't here, you wouldn't have found the cache, she pointed out. I could have lost you. The raw emotion in his voice silenced her protests. The metal box contained exactly what they needed: documents proving corruption at the highest levels of the territorial government, all connected to stolen silver shipments. Her father had documented everything, including Hardin's orders to eliminate anyone who discovered the scheme. He was a good man, Jackson said as they rode back to Montrose, side by side. Flawed but brave. He saved many lives by gathering this evidence. At the cost of his own, Grace said softly. His sacrifice won't be in vain. These documents will ensure justice. They reached Montrose after nightfall to find the town buzzing with excitement. Word of the arrests had spread, along with the role Grace had played. Sarah flew into her uncle's arms, then Grace's, babbling about how worried she'd been. Don't ever do something so foolish again, Jackson told Grace sternly once they were alone in his office. Riding into a gunfight, what were you thinking? I was thinking about you, she answered simply. About not losing you. The anger drained from his face. He moved closer, his hands gentle as they framed her face. "I've spent my whole life fighting one battle or another, never had much to lose." His voice roughened. "Until now. Jackson, let me finish. When I saw you in that canyon, I realized something. I'm in love with you, Grace Whittaker. Have been since the day I unlocked those shackles from your wrists." Her heart soared. "I thought perhaps it was just duty to my father that made you protect me." "It started that way," he admitted, "but not anymore." His thumbs traced her cheekbones. "I know I'm not the sophisticated man you probably dreamed of back in Boston. I'm just a lawman in a rough town. But if you could see your way clear to—" Grace silenced him with a kiss, rising on tiptoes to press her lips to his. After a startled moment, he responded, arms encircling her waist to draw her closer. The kiss deepened, weeks of unspoken longing finding expression at last. When they finally parted, breathless, he rested his forehead against hers. "Does this mean you'll stay in Montrose?" "Even now that the danger's past, wild horses couldn't drag me away," she whispered. "I have a school to run, students who need me." "And what about the Marshal? Does he need you too?" "Desperately, I should think." She smiled against his lips. "Someone has to teach him to make decent biscuits." He laughed, the sound free and unguarded. "Sarah told you about that, did she?" She might have mentioned it. Grace grew serious. "I love you too, Jackson Lawson. I think I have since you said she is with me now and set me free." "I didn't set you free," he corrected gently. "You were always free. I just made sure everyone else knew it." The trial of Hardin and his conspirators became the talk of Colorado territory. Grace testified about finding her father's hidden cache, her poised demeanor and clear testimony impressing the Denver judge. The evidence was damning. 5 territorial officials were implicated in the silver theft scheme, including a judge and the lieutenant governor. Justice for James Whittaker came in the form of Hardin's conviction for first-degree murder. As he was led away to serve a life sentence, he spat at Jackson's feet. "You think this is over, Lawson? My friends will—" "Your friends are being arrested as we speak," Jackson cut him off. "It's over, Hardin, for all of you." Outside the Denver courthouse, Jackson took Grace's hand. "Ready to go home?" Home. Montrose had become that for her in just a few short months. More than ready. They married on a perfect spring day in May 1876, with the entire town in attendance. Sarah served as maid of honor, beaming with pride in her new blue dress as Grace and Jackson exchanged vows in the white-painted church. "I take you, Grace Whittaker, to be my wife," Jackson said, his voice carrying clearly to the back pews. "I promise to protect and cherish you, to respect your independence and strength, and to love you all the days of my life." Grace's own vows acknowledged their unusual beginning. "From chains to choice, from auction block to altar, you set me on a path to find not just freedom, but love. I promise to stand beside you in all battles, to create a home filled with warmth and laughter, and to love you with unwavering devotion until my last breath." Mrs. Henderson wept openly. Mayor Porter declared it the finest wedding Montrose had ever seen. Even Grace's aunt from Boston, initially scandalized by her niece's decision to remain in that wild territory, admitted that Marshal Lawson seemed a worthy man. At the reception in the schoolyard, decorated with wildflowers and lanterns, Jackson pulled Grace away from the celebrating townspeople for a private moment. "Happy?" he asked, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "Completely." She smiled up at him. "Though I'm still getting used to being Mrs. Lawson instead of Miss Whittaker to my students." "You'll always be Miss Whittaker in the classroom," he assured her. "The town needs its schoolteacher as much as I need my wife." Their home, A cabin Jackson had spent months expanding and improving on land just outside town became a gathering place for friends, and a sanctuary for them both. Sarah blossomed under their joint care, excelling in school and developing into a confident young lady who could still outride and outshoot most boys her age. Grace continued teaching, implementing advanced curricula that drew praise from visiting education officials. When several families moved to Montrose specifically for their children's education, Mayor Porter declared her the town's greatest asset. Besides its marshal, Jackson amended, earning laughter from the town council. They weathered challenges together: harsh winters, Jackson's dangerous work, illness that swept through town. Through it all, their bond only strengthened. In the spring of 1878, Grace placed Jackson's hand on her still flat stomach. "There's going to be a new Lawson come winter," she told him. The joy that illuminated his face was everything she'd hoped for. "A baby, you're certain?" Dr. Phillips confirmed it yesterday. "Around December, he thinks." Jackson gathered her close, his embrace gentle as if she might break. "I never thought I'd have this," he confessed against her hair. "A woman I adore, a family. After Sarah's parents died, I figured that was my lot, raising my niece alone." "Well, Mr. Lawson," Grace said, leaning back to see his face, "it seems your lot has improved considerably." Their son, James, was born on a snowy December night with Sarah serving as the doctor's assistant and Jackson pacing nervously outside the bedroom door. When finally allowed inside, he approached the bed with awe, taking in the sight of Grace cradling their newborn. "He has your eyes," she said tiredly but triumphantly. "And your jaw. Poor kid," Jackson joked, voice thick with emotion as he gently touched his son's tiny hand. "But your nose, thank goodness." Sarah peered over his shoulder. "He's so small. Was I that small, Uncle Jack?" "Even smaller," Jackson assured her. "But just as perfect." As their family grew, twin daughters Emma and Elizabeth joining them in 1880, followed by another son, William. In 1883, Grace sometimes reflected on the strange path that had brought her to this life. The auction block that had seemed the end of everything had instead been the beginning. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Jackson presented her with a small wooden box. Inside lay the key to the shackles he had unlocked that day in Montrose, mounted on velvet with an inscription: "From bondage to freedom, from strangers to lovers, from auction block to family. Forever grateful." "You kept it all this time?" Grace asked, touched beyond words. "To remind me how close I came to never finding you." He kissed her softly. "The best $1,000 I ever spent." "She is with me now," Grace quoted softly, the words that had started their journey. "Always," Jackson promised, gathering her into his arms as their children played in the yard beyond the window. Always. In the years that followed, Montrose grew from frontier town to thriving city. Jackson eventually retired as marshal, though he remained active in community affairs. Grace's little schoolhouse expanded into a proper school with multiple teachers, though she remained its heart and principal until retiring in her 60s. Sarah married a young lawyer who became the territory's youngest judge, giving Jackson and Grace 3 grandchildren to dote on even before their own children started families. James followed in his father's footsteps, becoming a U.S. Marshal whose territory covered much of Colorado. The twins pursued education, with Emma teaching alongside her mother and Elizabeth establishing a women's college in Denver. William, their youngest, combined his father's practical skills and his mother's intellect to become an engineer working on the expanding railroad system. On warm summer evenings, Jackson and Grace would sit on their porch, watching the sunset paint the mountains gold and purple. They'd reminisce about those early days, the auction block, Devil's Canyon, their wedding day. Their hands would find each other, fingers interlacing with the easy familiarity of decades together. "Any regrets?" Jackson would sometimes ask, a ritual question with a known answer. "Not one," Grace would always reply, squeezing his hand. "From the moment you said she is with me now, my life began anew." And he would smile, the lines around his eyes deepening lines earned through years of protecting others, raising children, and loving one woman with unwavering devotion. "Best words I ever spoke," he'd say, "and the truest." Together they'd watch darkness settle over their beloved Montrose, secure in the knowledge that the unlikely love that began at an auction block had built not just a family, but a legacy.